Okay, so I'm going to look at a couple examples of a while loop versus a do while loop. These are both examples of indefinite loops, loops that will run an unknown number of times. So for a while loop, generally we need to do something called prime the while loop, which is sort of make sure that the initial condition that you want the loop to run with is gonna work, or is gonna at least be tested. So it depends on what that condition is, but generally before you enter the while loop, you have to prime or make sure that that condition is something that we can test. And then while the condition is true, it'll run whatever the statements are in the body of the loop each time, and then it comes back up and checks whether the condition is true. At some point within the while loop, one of these statements needs to update that condition. This is a very common thing, that we forget to update whatever the condition is within the while loop, and then the while loop will run forever. So that's not an uncommon thing to happen when we're using indefinite loops, is to run into infinite loops that just don't ever terminate. One way to check if you have that is just throw a print statement in there, and all of a sudden you see your name printing nonstop. You'll know you're in an infinite loop. Another way of doing it, sort of a less traditional method, is the do while loop. This generally doesn't need to be primed before. We could prime the do while loop within the loop, so it does the body of the loop first, and then it checks the condition after. This is sort of a less traditional method. I think one or two of the homeworks specifically say to use a do while loop. So that means that in practice that it's looking for that. But in general, I think if you can do it with a while loop, I think it's a better choice. That could just because I'm, I don't know, a little more old-fashioned, but the do while loop is sort of a workaround the need to prime the loop. Sometimes it can save you a line or two of code as well. Okay, so let's look at an example. Create a class, multiples of, that has a method that will continue to randomly generate and print a number between 1 and 1,000, inclusive. So that inclusive means starting with 1 and going up to 1,000. Inclusive until that number is a multiple of 10. We'll look at this two ways. Traditional while loop first. So in there we need to first get the random number. That'll prime the while loop. Then while that random number is not a multiple of 10, we'll print that number and get another random number. And then if that number is not a multiple of 10, we'll print it, get another number. If that's not a multiple of 10, we'll print it, get another number. As soon as that random number is a multiple of 10, we'll exit the while loop, and then we'll output that the result, the final result number is a multiple of 10. To do this, we need to use the random class. So feel free to pause if you need to catch that pseudocode. This is all stuff that I would be putting in my notes or on the board. I'm going to switch over to coding in a second. The random class, we need to import the utility, import java.utilities, everything. Then random R, R is the name of the random object, is a new random object. So I guess here I could really have like, this is the name. That's the syntax of a random object. And then we can utilize some of the common methods for the random class. We'll pick the one down here, next integer, where we put the maximum value in. And in our case, because we want to go up to 1,000, we want to go up to, in our next integer, 1,001. Oh, and that'll start at 0. My thing is starting at 1. Let's just simplify it. Start at 0. I could make it start at 1 by just adding 1 to the number we get, but I'll simplify it, start it at 0, make our lives easier. Okay, so we'll jump over to Eclipse. Make a new class in Chapter 5. Go ahead and pause if you need to. Call it multiples of, public static void. Finish. I'm gonna modify our program in a bit, so we're gonna use methods here to do this. So within main, well, let's go back to our pseudocode for a second. Instead of outputting this result, let's just return the number, and then in main we can output the result is a multiple of 10. So this will be sort of the method. We're going to call this multiple let's call this method multiple of 10. So the method, let's just call it multiples. Let's call it multiples. That method multiples will get a random number. While the random number is not a multiple of 10, it'll print the number and get another random number, and then it will return that final random number. And then within main, we'll call another function output results. That'll enable me to be able to modify this class that I'm writing right now. Okay, so in main, we're going to set up integer, let's call it number equals multiples. And then we'll output the results, sending that number to it. So we have two methods. One is called multiples, one is called output results. I'll set up both headers right now. So for multiples, public static, it's going to return an integer. Let's type integer. And we'll just set up a return statement for right now. Return -1. Just to set up the logic that it's working. And then we'll do our second method, public static. Output results does not return anything, so void. It does have a parameter, integer n. I think I could go ahead and write this method right now. Let's use a printf statement that says the number, we're going to put our number in there, %d is a multiple of 10, comma n. And of course I need system.out. So I set up my output results. We could just test that really quickly. Let's just, it should print -1, right? Because we returned a -1 from multiples. So if I just run this, just testing my logic, the number of -1 is a multiple of 10. Clearly it's not, but this is a way of checking that our logic is working. Okay, so now we need to come in here to multiples and write this method. So a couple of things. Upstairs, let's set up some comments. I'm not going to say what this method is doing, but just set it up like that, and then we'll import Java. Everything from the utility package. This is for a random object. Okay, so in multiples, we'll generate our random number. First, set up the object random r equals new random. And now we'll go back to our pseudocode. So we need to get a random number in order to prime the while loop. So integer n equals r dot next integer. So it's going to go from 0 up to 1 less than this number. So this would just go up to 999. We want to go up to 1,000. So we need to go to 1,001. Priming the while loop, and I could put a comment in here. Prime the while loop. Usually you wouldn't comment this; it would be self-evident. But just because we're new to doing that, I'll put it in there. And then I'll do my while loop. While. So the condition is that n divided by 10, n mod 10 does not equal 0. N is not a multiple of 10. What do we want to do? Go back to our pseudocode, print the number, and get another random number. While n divided by 10 does not equal 0, let's just print the number itself on its own line, and then so then we're updating the condition here within our while loop, so that notice if I don't get another number, and that first number was not a multiple of 10, it will just keep printing that number that we got forever. It'll never get out of this guy. You could try that. 112. So look, it's just in an infinite loop. It'll run until my computer crashes it, or we stop it. There we go. All right, and you can see it ran a lot of times. Many times. Okay, so what we need to do here is get another number, and it's really just the same line of code as this without the integer declaration. N equals r dot next integer, 1,001, and then we don't want to return. So now at the end of this method, that will continue to get a number until it's divisible by 10, and then at the end of it, we want to return that number. And then in terms of our overall function, what's going to happen, that's the number is going to get returned, and output results is going to send that number. Main will call output results and send it into here, which will then print this number as a multiple of 10. So there's all of the code. Maybe tighten that up a little bit. Space between main and multiples of. I could actually tighten this up now. Maybe I'd have something like that. We don't need that space. Tighten it up. There we go. There's my return. There's my second method. Run it. Scroll up. Got a bunch of numbers. I'll show you my console here. Bunch of numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 numbers. The 14th number was a multiple of 10. Run it a few times. This time it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 numbers. The last number is a multiple of 10. Run it again. The last number is a multiple of 10. Another thing I could put in here is my pre and post conditions on this multiples method. Precondition, there are no parameters coming in, so there are actually no preconditions for this method. Post condition, we're returning an integer that is a multiple of 10. I'm going to show you all that code now again. And if you need to, you can pause and get that code. Okay, so one thing I just want to point out here is this priming of the loop. Again, is that right here, you'll see this line of code where we initialize the value of n happens before we enter the while loop, and then it's essentially the same line of code within the loop that updates the value of n. Very rarely can you avoid this redundancy where you have to initialize the value first and then you have to update it within the loop. Usually that is going to happen while using while loops. The do while loop is sort of a way around that, but it creates other issues of its own that you have to deal with. One thing I want to point out here as well is in the PowerPoint, essentially they're doing the same thing, but she's creating a list. And so in that list that's being created, there's some syntax that we might not be comfortable with yet because we don't have lists. Here it is. So when she's here talking about outputting this list of numbers, she's generating a list of numbers and then printing them one by one on the left with for loop, and on the right also with the for loop to talk about a fence post algorithm. It's a little bit weird here. I thought it was using while loops, sorry, but I forgot. So I just wanted to point out this syntax is something that we don't have yet, this integer list. So if you need to skip this page, it's fine. Weird place to put it in this recording, sorry. All right, now we'll go back to the pseudocode and look at the do while loop. How would that change? So if we want to do the same thing using a do while loop, now the pseudocode changes a little bit. It says, do something. In this case, do the following. Get a random number, print it if it is not a multiple of 10, and continue that process until, so get another random number, print it if it's not a multiple of 10. Get a random number, print it if it's not a multiple of 10. We do that until the random number is not a multiple of 10. Then we output the results of that number that it is a multiple of 10. So it's a little bit weird. In terms of, again, this double sort of, if it's not a multiple of 10, we're going to print it, and then we're going to keep doing that while it's not a multiple of 10. So the repeat's not happening at the start, the repeat's happening sort of at the end. And let's look at how that works. So I think rather than changing this one, because I'm going to use this one to modify later, I'm going to make a new class called multiples of 2. And essentially, main should be the same. So I'm going to go back here, multiples of, and just save us a little time and copy this out of here for main. And really, let's just copy the whole thing. Or not the whole thing. Let's copy output results. And let's copy all of this, but then we won't use it all. Okay, so there's the exact same program we just wrote. And now I'm going to clear the insides of this out and just return -1. And again, if you need to pause and do that on your own, that would be great. Okay, so I see a typo, multiple of 10. I'll go back here and fix that typo as well. Okay, so now we need to switch to a do while loop, I'm still going to need a random object. So random r equals new random. And now we're going to start the do while loop. So we're going to do a series of statements. What are they? Generate a random number. So integer n equals r dot next int up to 1001. And then, so we're going to do these things while n divided by 10 does not equal 0. Doesn't like that because I defined the integer n within the while loop. So I declared it within the do portion. So I need to actually declare n a little higher. Integer n. And then we're going to do something. We're going to assign n a value, random value, and then we're going to print that. And then we'll keep going until n divided by 10 does not equal 0. When it does equal 0, we'll return n. Okay, so this isn't exactly what I want, and I'll show you why in a second. Let's run it and see what happens. So this is similar to the last problem. We generated the random numbers, we printed them out. The difference here is that 440 printed first, and then we exited the loop and we printed that 440 is a multiple of 10. So this might be okay. It depends on what the instruction set was. If we want it to be, so notice the 440 is the last number printed, and then it's also the number being printed in our output statement. So if we want to get rid of this copy, this extra 440 here, what do we have to do? And I put that in my pseudocode over here. We print the number if it's not a multiple of 10. So what I do there is I put an if statement in around this print statement that says if n divided by 10 does not equal 0, then let's print it. Oh, I put the not equals to on the wrong side of the. Okay, so you'll notice, in not having to prime the loop, we saved some space before, but not really, because we still had to declare n before I went into the do while loop. So the do it does the action first and tests after, but sometimes in order to test, you still need to know what that number is. So in this example, we had to have n existing before I could enter the do while loop. So I still had that line of code, even though I'm not initializing it. And then in the do while loop, I'm assigning it. If it's not divisible by 10, I'm outputting it. Otherwise, I'm getting another. Not getting another. I'm doing that until it is divisible by 10. And then I'm exiting the do loop, then I'm returning that value. So now if I run it, it finds all the values that are not divisible by 10, and as soon as it hits one that is, it says it is a multiple of 10. So these are both forms of an indefinite loop. I think it's safer, if you can, to always use a while loop as opposed to the do while loop. But you can play around with it a little bit on your own, see which one you prefer. I'm going to modify this first. I'm not going to modify the second one. I'm going to modify the first program in the next video so that we're not just looking for multiples of 10, but looking for multiples of anything.